Coming to you from our nation's capital, I'm Al Dominic, and this is Cornerstone Advisors Plugged In. Buckle up, my friends, because we're about to get dialed in on the business of banking with help from my partner and co-host, Steve Williams.
How's it going, Al? Sitting here in Scottsdale HQ at Cornerstone.
I miss sitting with you, my friend, but we've got a very special guest who's joining us from a regional bank headquartered up in Seattle, Washington. That's right, we're talking shop with the CEO who runs Washington Federal, better known by its longtime nickname of WaFd. So, Steve, could you help us welcome our guests?
You bet. I've been blessed to know this gentleman for more than 20 years. Back in the day when he was a CFO, making sure everything balanced and booked right and earnings were there, and then he became now a great CEO at WaFd and is really, I would tell you, blossomed as a leader both of the institution, the industry, the community. Mr. Brent Beardall. Brent, good to have you here.
Hey, great to be here, Steve. And I'm not going to let Al get away with that. Buckle up, ladies and gentlemen. Was that intended only for me, Al? I appreciate that.
It's more about my concern for Steve's well-being. Usually he and I hold it down. We give each other a little clink with our plugged-in mugs, and we're off to the races. But
yeah.
It's because
for the record, I was buckled up with a 5-point harness, which saved my life. So thank you very much.
Well, we're going to be getting into that. Don't you worry. But before we do, I appreciate Steve not bearing the lead with your name and the introduction. But I got to say, Brent, one of the guilty pleasures that I have in terms of hosting Plugged In with Steve goes to these 5-song set lists that we create for our listeners' delight. And they also help us to cover a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time by framing some talking points against music that many of us know and I think love. So in past episodes, we've had some fun juxtaposing 50 Cent with Frank Sinatra, U2 with Run DMC, and Vanilla Ice with Elvis Presley. So to keep this tradition alive, we're going to bring in some lyrics from bands like Depeche Mode and Pearl Jam to keep this business conversation creative and, I do hope entertaining, because as my man Steve will model out, we take some liberties with the lyrics to show how the business of banking really never is boring. So, Steve, you want to give us our first run?
For the audience out there, we're gonna start with really what needs to be talked about first. We're gonna get into banking, Brent, but I'm gonna start with a song from your hometown, from Pearl Jam up in Seattle, one of their more reflective songs, "Just Breathe," where Eddie says, "I'm a lucky man who can count on both hands the ones I loved." And your New Year's Day was starting out with great expectations and turned into tragedy. Your good friend Nathan Ricks, a customer of the bank, a fabulous entrepreneur, was lost in a plane crash in Provo, Utah, on the runway, and you were there. And really, by God's grace, Brent, you survived that crash. And as I've talked to you this year, it's been pretty powerful in terms of what that's meant for you. I'd love for you to, let's start personal. Share what's going through your life today and what does it mean to you? I know it's been very personal.
Thank you for this opportunity. And we were just talking before we got started about perspective, and perspective is an amazing thing. And going through what I went through on January 2nd. So I was on a private jet airplane, leaving from Provo, Utah, going down to the Rose Bowl of all things with a client. Nathan Ricks was the pilot, a very experienced pilot, a very trustworthy aircraft, and he invited me to sit in the co-pilot seat. Right? I mean, what good banker wouldn't want to sit in the co-pilot seat and enjoy the ride down? And we took off, and unfortunately, something went tragically wrong. And after getting a couple hundred feet in the air, we ended up going nose first into the ground. And my friend Nathan passed on impact, and I suffered meaningful injuries. And quite frankly, by the grace of God, am I here? And it's one of those that it's hard to understand why you're fortunate enough to live, and your good friend who was sitting right next to you passed on impact. And I'm not smart enough to figure that out, other than to say, there's a plan, someone above that wants me to be here for whatever reason. Most likely is I have a few more lessons to learn. And, you've got to just roll with the punches and accept what is and control what you can control. But I've also learned going through this that I have two very distinct portions of kind of my being, and that's my analytical side, which has dominated the vast majority of my existence for 52 years, being a bank CFO, then CEO, and just crunching the numbers and figuring this out, and working with Cornerstone, figuring out, okay, who do we want as our core provider and why? And you've got that part of your being, and that's been 95% of my life. And then you also have this emotional side, and you can understand, you can rationalize something analytically as to what happened and why, but then you have an emotional side that there's disconnect. And one of my lessons going through this is to make more room for that emotional side, and to make more room that it's okay not to be okay. Because sometimes I'm just not okay. Sometimes I can't reconcile the survivor's guilt of why I was fortunate enough to live and my good friend Nathan was not. But that being said, it's an incredible blessing to be alive. And the other thing that I want to tell the listeners is I'm sure there's a number of people out there that I know pretty well. Thank you, sincerely, and it's deeply personal to me. So many people exercise their faith in whatever it is they believe on my behalf, pulling for me, loving me, and it's unlike anything I've ever experienced. The wave of faith and prayers trying to lift me up, and there were some pretty dark times, and going through that lifted me up, and I cannot overstate how important that is. And so many people called me up and said, Brent, what can we do? And I said, please just keep doing what you're doing. I don't need you to do anything. I don't need flowers. I don't need a contribution. I just need your love and prayers. And in today's day and age, we are so hyper-focused on our differences. And our differences exist. Our differences are real, and we shouldn't, brush them aside at all. But let's not just focus on our differences, but let's focus on the humanity we have in common, the love and caring for each other. And it's one of my great lessons going through this is I used to be very, very hesitant to tell people how I really thought about them, right? If somebody was important and dear to me, I wouldn't tell them I love them, because you just don't do that, right? I mean, you don't, and this is a business setting. And you know what? The heck with that. I tell people that mean something to me, I love them and I appreciate them and I care for them. And it's really been healing to my soul.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate seeing you on out there with your team, the WaFd team. I remember one day you were in Texas, Brent, and you and I have been texting each other, checking in. But I love how your story, and most importantly, just the message you just said, people are resonating with it. And heck yeah, let's put that on top of the analytics of banking and everything else, because I think it really goes with the mission of regional and community banks about being out there in the trenches with folks and have an impact. So I just want to say on behalf of Al and I, it's great to see that you're walking the talk and people are responding, and that energy is awesome.
As I said, it puts things in perspective, right? The word relationship banking is thrown around too much, but it is about relationships. And when everything else is said and done, what really matters is those relationships. So I appreciate my relationships with both you and Al, and look forward to this conversation. And it's a good framework to think about what's really important and what's not. And it turns out bank technology is important. It's just not as important as everything else.
Yeah, and this, I mean, you grew up in finance, but what I love about talking with you about the industry these days is what's going on with the transformation of WaFd and how excited and kind of geeked out you get on that, Brent. So Al's going to take us to the next song.
I mean, well, and again, I just want to double down on what Steve said, because, what I've found in my life is there's days where you need a hand and there's days when you can give a hand. When you wake up, you don't know which is it going to be. And so what you're saying is, incredibly important for all people, not just business leaders, to understand that we're just, we have differences, but we have a lot more in common, and let's just help each other out.
I'm going to go with you on that one, and also state, right, the old perceptions of what makes you strong, either a strong man or a strong woman, to hide those feelings, those times when you need help. I think that couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
Right. When you need a hand, don't be afraid to reach out to someone you love to ask for that hand, because it turns out there's a lot more people willing to give you that hand than you give yourself credit for. And so I could not agree more. Wake up and ask yourself, can you give somebody else a hand? And when you have those tough days, don't be afraid to ask for that hand up.
Yep. Well, Brent, I've long admired your leadership from the outside. Whether that was when I was a CEO at Bank Director or now, as a partner of Steve at Cornerstone. And, when I think about what distinguishes your business leadership from others that have been in the financial sector over the years, one biggie is when you launched Pike Street Labs to really bridge that divide between regional banks and modern technology. And so, as we, pick up on what Steve said around tech and, where things are heading, I'm really kind of curious if we could use what Asia, the band Asia, sang in Heat of the Moment when they said, do you remember when we used to dance and incidences arose from circumstance? Your business much better than me. Could you take us back to the circumstance that led you and your board member, I'm blanking on his name, but I know he was the co-founder
Stephen Singh,
of
I think. Yeah.
How did you even think about creating this venture, let alone doing such incredible work?
Well, thanks for that, lead in. And I love the way you guys approach this with kind of retro music, and kind of it gives you flashbacks just thinking about it. But let me tell you kind of how this came about for us and the journey we're on. And so I came to WaFd Bank in January of 2001. And when I came to the bank, we were literally world renowned for our efficiency ratio. We had a 17% efficiency ratio. Think about that, a 17% efficiency ratio. Our total shareholder return was one in the top 10 of all banks in the United States since going public. It had been a remarkable run. And I looked at this, I couldn't figure it out. Here's a bank with this incredible efficiency ratio, but the technology was awful. And when I say that, that is, people did business with us in spite of our technology. Literally, the ledger for the holding company, which at the time I think was about a $600 million market cap, was on a tall chief tablet in 2001. We had no voicemail. We had no email. The computer system we had purchased literally for pennies a pound from WaMu. They were getting rid of their computer system, and we bought it by the container full for pennies on the per pound. So that's where we came from. There's all kinds of different ways to be successful, and to me it was just so fascinating. Here in the shadows of Microsoft and Amazon and Seattle, Washington, you have this bank that is just staying as far away from technology yet thriving. And so I came in, and you know what they say when you join a new company, bite your tongue, just learn and try to figure out what it's about. But always in the back of my mind, I had this burning that why can't we utilize technology to accelerate the value proposition we can deliver for our clients? And I learned and understood what we've done at WaMu, and over time we made big changes to technology under my predecessor's leadership, Roy Whitehead, when I was the CFO. And we converted to one of the big three. I'll never forget November 15th, 2015. I think we converted 18 systems over the weekend. And, we drank the Kool-Aid. Everything was going to be fantastic. And that conversion was terrible, awful. It took us literally 2 years to get back to kind of a stabilized system. And then what we found is after we'd converted to those 18 systems, the lack of integration was pathetic. And so, and then I talked to other bank CEOs and found out, hey, this is just what you come to expect. You don't have the integration. You have manual processes. You ask for things and you're told they're on the roadmap. I've told our team I never want to hear that again, because the roadmap is just a nice way of saying, we understand what you want. We're never going to get to it. Just set it aside and let us move forward doing what we were going to do anyhow. So that's where we were in 2017 when I had the opportunity to ascend into the CEO role. And we were going through our business planning process. And, as everybody does, we do a base year projection and then, a positive scenario and negative scenario and do that out for 3 years. And we were through the entire process. And our newest board member, Steve Singh, looks up at 11th hour and 32nd minute and says, Brent, I would challenge management to aim higher. And my initial reaction was, how dare you? You have no idea how hard it is to do what we do, right? Look at all the banks that have failed and how we've been successful, and aim high. Thankfully, I swallowed my pride and I bit my tongue. And I said, okay, let me think about this. And I went back and I did a whole bunch of introspection. And I said, you know what? And this was Steve Singh, the co-founder of Concur.
Yeah.
He's right.
A tech entrepreneur, right? So he wasn't, he knew what he was talking about, right, Brent?
He did. And the beauty of Concur and what he was talking about is he took something that everybody did, expense reports, and he automated it. It's just do the simple things and make them easy. And the beauty of Steve is he can call BS when it comes to technology. When we say, hey, Steve, that's not possible, he says, oh, yes, it is. You just don't have the right talent, right? And so with that encouragement from Steve to aim higher, we came back with what we call Vision 2025, which was to take this bank that was so backwards from a technology standpoint and become a digital first bank. And that's nothing that you just snap your fingers and happens. That's a journey. And we also say it's our journey to freedom from being reliant on one of the big three. Because I think it's a terrible position to be in as a bank executive, that your future, what you want to do, you're just tied to what one of the big three can deliver. And you should never be tied because, hey, well, I've got this contract. It is what it is. No, you should be bound by what's the best technology in the marketplace, and then let's implement it. And if you don't have the best technology, then you're not in a position to make the choices you need to make. And if your provider doesn't have that best technology, shame on them.
Right. Well, and it's also, Brent, you really created a product group in Pike Street, not another IT department. And this is not your whole IT department. You kept your IT department to run the bank. This is a tech group thinking about product development and product releases, correct?
No, that's exactly right. So what we did is we established this group called Pike Street Labs that is now morphed into Archway Software that I'm really excited about. And we followed, Jeff Bezos said that if you can't feed your team with 2 pizzas, the team's too big. So very, very small team of about 12 to 15 engineers, right? And we said, here's our problem. And historically, what we did as a management team, we said, here's our problem and here's how we want you to solve it. No, don't do that. Hire the right people, go to them with a problem and let them tell you how they're going to solve it with modern technology. And so that's what we did at Pike Street Labs. We built a massive data lake using AWS. We brought in a middleware layer to connect all the different pieces. And so we extract all the data from our different systems, put it in our data lake, and then we've built software that's customer-facing software that's actually built by Archway now that delivers a wow to people that is phenomenal. And it is so much fun when you can actually demonstrate a technology to a customer and get them to say, wow, and you're doing this to a customer of JP Morgan, of Wells Fargo, that's a game changer for a regional bank.
Al, it sounds like Brent's describing what we call building the smarter bank, right? I think you've got a third song that ties in with this theme about reinvention.
I do, but I was going to say, I was hoping Brent didn't pull an Aaron Rodgers at one point in his career and go into like a darkness retreat after, Steven said, hey, 11th hour, we got to change, because I think Aaron went down to Oregon for 4 days in total isolation. So I could just see Brent walking out of the bank saying, I'll be back in 4 or 5 days, fellas.
Yeah, listening to some real Seattle grunge to get really dark.
No kidding. But you know what? If we do want to play off of some music, we have Strange Fascinations, Fascinating Me. Changes are taking the pace I'm going through. That was
David Bowie.
Sung by David Bowie. Nice job. See, Brent, this is what happens with Steve and myself. We start, geeking out on the music side of things. But that song "Changes" by David Bowie really does tie into the smarter bank concept that we've been, kicking around within Cornerstone, because we think a smarter bank has to be fast, differentiated, and trusted. And to Steve's point about your 2025 vision, it's not so much necessarily what you want to change, but maybe we start with that old Jeff Bezos, what we don't want to change as we think about a smarter bank being developed. You want to maybe take a crack at this?
Yeah, we'll do our best. And I have to tell you, I'm impressed at your music trivia for both of you. So well done.
We're coming too, so don't you worry.
Okay, yeah. Steve, I failed to give you credit where credit is due. So, a smarter bank and what's not going to change. And I describe that as being nimble, right? And it's hard to think we're a 106-year-old organization. How in the world do you get a 106-year-old organization to be nimble? And the answer for me is not asking people that have full-time jobs already to do something else. You need the people that have full-time jobs to do their jobs. And in our case, this was our IT department to continue to, make sure the trains run on time and get everything done. And then establish someone else to actually build the software that can integrate things. And then once they've built it, they can pass it off. So it's such a fascinating thing. We're so hyper focused on, okay, what do we want to change? What do we want to change? And I'm a fan of Bezos and what he's been able to do, obviously, but what's not going to change? Banks, which are essentially financial intermediaries, I don't see that changing, right? There's always going to be people in our society that have an excess of funds and people in our society that are looking for reasonable leverage. And so if a bank can play that role of the financial intermediary, and by the way, this could be a whole nother podcast, how so much of that is now leaving the banking segment and going into non-banks, whether that be private equity funds, family offices, so forth. But I believe there will always be that need. That is not going to change. So what will be there? Banks will need to be able to take in deposits. And certainly we're being challenged by the likes of Apple today, but banks will need to be able to take in deposits, serve their clients, and make it completely transparent. And then banks will need to be able to make loans and actually utilize technology. So much of our underwriting is still manual driven. Wouldn't it be great if we could utilize technology to have a real-time finger on the pulse of the companies? So instead of saying, oh my goodness, would you fill out this form so I can see what kind of line of credit? Hey, if I can be plugged into their CRM and I could see their cash flow and what's happening, I could come to them and say, hey, here's a line of credit for you. And it's that trust is what we're hoping to get to. If we could have that real-time understanding. So that's what I think of in terms of a smarter bank. Let's not just do things the way we've always done things. Let's say, how can we reinvent this to actually be of more value to our clients?
Yeah, and I think that concept of trust is so critical for business leaders to think about, because it's a constantly shifting expectation that people have of us. What trust was in the past was, sitting down, explaining, having some authenticity, but what it is in the future might be maybe a little less transparency, a little bit more privacy, or, you use the word nimble, I think of being responsive. But I love how you're approaching this. And maybe, Steve, we talked about one of the courses that WaFd has to, kind of model the trust in their communities. You want to pick this up with our...
Yeah, we're going to go a little like 80s kind of MTV wave Howard Jones. He says, it may take a little time, a lonely path, an uphill climb. Success or failure will not alter it. Things can only get better. And here's what's kind of cool. Again, you're a finance guy. You used to run circles around me with analytics when I try to talk to you, Brent. But then you've become this very spiritual leader. You're into tech. You're also really taking WaFd deep into community. And we see things, your work with the schools, your work with, $1 million plus every year in community giving, and even the financial literacy part, the bonsai classes you're doing to promote financial literacy, your work with EverFi and some other tools out there. So another dimension of you and your team. Why is that important for the smarter bank to be so embedded in community, Brent?
It goes down to purpose. In today's day and age, people don't just come to work for a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
I don't just come to work for a paycheck. I want to be part of something that's bigger than myself, and I want to make a difference. And it's something that I've asked every employee at WaFd to do. Two things. Number one, love what you do, right? It's obvious you two love what you do. You're making a game out of this podcast. It's wonderful, right? And it's actually liberating when you tell your employees that, hey, I want you to love what you do. I know we've got some jobs that aren't too glamorous, whether that be a computer operations job, whether that be a collections job, regulatory relations. They're jobs that need to get done. And either figure out a way to love what you're doing or go somewhere else. You'll be better off, we'll be better off, and our clients will be better off. So number one, that's an empowering message, right? To love what you do. And then number two, after you love what you do, I challenge everyone to make a difference. Don't just be a wallflower along for the ride. I said, never go to a meeting. If your day is just so full of meetings, you can't get your job done, don't go to the meetings. And I said, even if that's a meeting I call, because if you're going to meetings and you're not getting anything out of it, that's a waste. You're employed by this company to make a difference. Make a difference in the lives of your customers, make a difference in your communities. And the beautiful thing about it from my perspective is I didn't, dictate what that means. Okay, Steve, to make a difference, here are the 5 things you're going to do. No, I'm saying, Steve, I challenge you to make a difference. And I look forward to you coming back to me, telling me how you made a difference. Right. And so that goes beyond just what are we doing to make a profit for our shareholders. That goes to making a difference in the communities. And what we're doing with financial education with Bonsai, it's at the heart of it, right? And this goes back to what Al's saying about trust. We're the fiduciary of $16 billion of deposits at WaFd. Our communities have trusted us. What are we going to do with that? We're going to work our tails off to protect that. But what are we going to do to help others make smart decisions about their finances? And to me, that's twofold. Number one, you need to educate people. And Bonsai is a great way to educate people. There's all kinds of financial literacy courses. There's TED Talks. I mean, more today than ever is financial literacy available to people. But most importantly, and this is what I love, is we have the tools today in our online banking to allow people to put it into action. It's one thing to have a course to learn about it. It's another thing to do it. And people talk about gamification. Stop the gamification. Let them do it. Play a game with your own money. And in our app today, you can have a real-time balance sheet. And so much of today's day and age is where'd you spend your money, yada, yada, which is good. But most important is your balance sheet. And I don't care if you have a net worth of $10 or $10 million. Having a real-time understanding of your balance sheet is the most important thing from a financial literacy standpoint, because in order to make a plan of where you're going, you need to know where you're at. So having that connectivity to say, here's my real-time balance sheet, and then let's set some goals. Where do you want to go?
Hey, man, Bill Gates said a computer on every desktop, and Brent Beardall saying a balance sheet in every house. That's the mission here.
There you go. Steve's bringing the heat every time. I don't know how I keep up with this.
Well, I mean, guy. I think, Al, for our final song, this is a man on a mission. And, a lot of people right now are kind of looking at turning their nose down at regional banking. Like everybody, Brent, we're looking at these PE ratios right now. And this morning at 6 to 7, we got great dividend. But I want to hold up just one little cheesy picture. And this is the footprint of WaFd. It goes all the way from, Pearl Jam and Soundgarden in Seattle down to country music in Dallas. But I'm going to point to this logo right here, Luther Burbank Savings in California. Brent, you guys added your 9th state coming up now with the acquisition of Luther Burbank. And I can only guess, Al and I can go and guess, you're bullish on regional banking. You're bullish on the franchise. This is your own personal Jesus. Who did that one, Al? Personal Jesus.
Yep.
Depeche Mode.
Oh, you beat Al to it. Okay, you guys are good.
Hey, look, we're cool. We're cool too.
It turns out we all grew up at the same time.
Yeah, I guess so. But you're on a mission, and tell us about, why you're excited about California. I know you got crazy Mark Barreco going to run it down there. Tell us about why you're excited, and it's a great footprint. And you keep expanding it.
Yeah, well, thanks for that opportunity. Before I get into California, let me tell you about what I think is irrational about the regional banks right now. And from time to time, the market can be irrational, and the market is the market. And I tend to ascribe to some of the Warren Buffett philosophies. If you buying a stock because you're going to pay attention to the swings in value from day in and day out, you shouldn't buy a stock. You should buy a stock for the fundamental performance of that company. And right now, regional banks are out of favor, but this too will pass, and people will realize, oh my goodness, look at these dividend yields I can get. Look at the underlying fundamentals. And right now, there is no question that the biggest banks are the beneficiary of these deposit flows because people are going towards safety, the implicit guarantee. But I think this too will settle down, and people will come back to that relationship word we talked about. It is really hard for the largest banks in America to be able to empower their employees to have meaningful relationships, and back to Al's word, trust. So I'm incredibly bullish on regional banking in general. I think there's room in our country for both the biggest banks and regional banks. I think they all play a very, very important part. And I won't go over the statistics in terms of the lending and the difference it can make, but I think mid-sized and regional banks are here to stay, and for a good reason. And I think it's probably a generational opportunity. Remember back in March of 2020 when we were staring into the pandemic and those values went down to everybody, it was the same thing. It was just fear-based selling. And then 2 years later, we were all saying we should have mortgaged our house and bought these stocks. I think likewise, we'll look back on this time as an opportunity, to just my perspective. In terms of our footprint, I could not be more excited about the opportunity to enter into California. It gives us an entire West Coast franchise, as you pointed out so nicely. And the really cool thing, and no one would have ever thought this of WaFd, this transaction came about because of what WaFd has been able to do from a technology standpoint. We have differentiated ourselves from so many of our peers from a technology standpoint. The management team and board at Luther Burbank looked at what we've been able to do in terms of transforming a legacy thrift to a commercial bank, and the benefits that's having to our balance sheet in this rising rate environment and our P&L. And they said, wow, we want to be part of that. And we've negotiated 100% stock transaction. They want what we're doing together, and they cannot wait to embrace our technology. And their staff is so excited about what we have to offer in terms of the online banking that Pike Street Labs built for us. We have voice authentication. We now have wire transfers that you go into the online banking and you put in the wire, and then the system calls you back and you authorize that wire transfer with your voice. That I know of, there's not another bank in the country that has that. And it turns out, you know who really, really wants wire transfers that are easy and secure? Really rich people. And a lot of those really rich people used to bank at First Republic, used to bank at Silicon Valley, and have now been inherited by others. And I think there's going to be a market to be able to go after those. And especially nice, we entered this transaction in November timeframe before all this banking chaos. And now all this banking chaos is happening in California. And hopefully soon, after we get FDIC approval, we'll be able to be in California and go after those clients. So yeah. I'm incredibly bullish on the opportunity.
Nothing says long-term like 100% stock deal. And Vic is a very smart guy. So it's really cool that you guys kind of as soulmates got together to say this is a long-term business. We look at the fundamentals, the Buffett type value approach, and that's really cool. And I know the institution and all of those execs and board members very committed to community. They've been part of Santa Rosa and around that forever. So it's a great entry point.
Yeah. Can I tell you a fun Vic story?
Sure.
And I think the world of Vic. So after we announced the deal, we went on a road show going to each of their branches and meeting them in person. And how cool, Vic, the founder and chairman, coming with Simone Lagomarsino and myself to visit all the teams. But at one point we were driving just over the Golden Gate Bridge, and Vic kind of, gives me a little punch in the leg. I'm like, what was that for? He's like, you see that over there? Do you know what that is over to the right? I'm like, yeah, that's San Quentin prison. He's like, it sure is. Let me tell you, Brent, if you screw this up, that's where you're going, and I'll come visit you.
There you go. So the pressure's on, buddy. I mean, you may have been life changed, but now you still got that lump in the throat.
You know what? I took that challenge. We're not going to screw it up. I admire Vic a great deal.
Well, we admire you a great deal too, Brent, and we really appreciate you taking some time to join both Steve and myself. You talked a lot of really important leadership traits about relationships, about trust, but really just being honest and upfront about what's happened to your personal life to start this off. Super impressive, and again, we couldn't be more appreciative. So this is Al Dominic. I'm looking at Steve Williams. I'm sending my thanks to Brent Beardall. Cornerstones Plugged In is wrapping up this episode, but we got more fun in the days and weeks to come. We hope you'll join us then. Thanks.
Thank you, Brent.
Thank you, gentlemen.